Good evening, everybody. Monday Morning Quarterback, episode 146. Back for the second week in a row. If you missed last week's episode, it was the first part of what we're going to talk about tonight. So don't worry, stay tuned in, listen to what we're going to talk about tonight, but you can go back and watch episode 145 on either our Facebook page or our YouTube page. So, what are we talking about? We're talking about how an adjustable shock works, how to adjust it, when to use it, to make it most powerful for your race team and the adjustments you need to make. So last week we talked a lot about kind of why we use adjustable shocks, what a shock does, what its functions are, when we would maybe make an adjustment to the shock. Tonight we're going to show you more of the inner workings of that shock, how the shock actually physically is making the adjustment, some different options when your shock builder is building your shocks. So whether you want a wide adjustment range or a narrow, why you may or may not want that. So we'll show you some of that tonight. And then as always, we'll answer all of your questions. So if you have a question, don't hesitate to ask. I will go back and answer those as we get to that point of the show. But you can ask them at any time. You're not going to be interrupting me. Hope you guys all had a good start to your week. It's Monday night here. Racing kicked off in Indiana yesterday, so that was really cool. Got to go to the No Way Out 40. A really good field of sprint cars. So glad to see that. Looks like we're getting off to a real strong start here. Racing wise, there's another big race this coming week in Brownstown on the sprint car side. So we're rocking and rolling. Everybody's racing pretty much everywhere in the country at this point, which is good news. So hopefully we have a fairly dry spring and we get to do a lot of racing and we don't have a bunch of rainouts. So without further ado, we're going to jump into tonight's topic. And the first thing I want to show you is some schematics that Shahab, our engineer, he's more than just the joke of the day, put together for me to show you guys kind of some of the inner workings of this shock. So let me pull this up. So the first thing we're going to show here is going to be a bunch of different shock adjuster needles. So you can see we have some smaller diameter ones that will flow less fluid, and then a couple different variations of degrees. And then on the larger diameter ones, you can see we have everything from a 30-degree needle down to a 4-degree needle. So why would we want to have this big of range of the needles, and what does that actually do? So we'll open up Rohrig here. And so you can see on this first shock I'm going to open, this is a left rear, how the shock doesn't adjust a whole bunch at 3-inch. So what we have there is a very fine needle tip, okay? So it's not going to adjust a ton of fluid through there. So your adjustment range is smaller, but what it does do is it gives you a bunch of adjustment options at your 0-inch number here, which is very important on the left rear. So you can see here that it has a very broad range, and we can make some pretty fine adjustments at the 0 and the 1-inch number. Now the next left rear shock I'm going to show you has a little bit wider range, so it's got a different needle. So you can see it adjusts much more at 3-inch, right? So from almost 300 pounds to under 100 pounds. And the adjustments at 0 are much bigger. So we have a much bigger jump there. So we're going to go from 225 to 140 with our first adjustment there. So big adjustments, really only 4 different adjustments from 220 to 50. So pretty big jumps. Where again, if we look at this first shock, you're going to see we've got a dozen or more adjustments between 220 and 50 in much smaller increments. And again, that is going to be totally dictated by the shape of the needle in the shock. So this is just the tip part. It's actually a full-blown needle. And so what we're going to show you here is where that goes in the shock. So As you can see right here, um, we have the adjuster on the single adjustable shock we showed you last week. So as you screw that in, what it does is it pushes this metering rod, is what we call it, up the shaft, and it pushes this needle, which we have a zoomed in view here, it pushes this needle into this jet. So we have a couple different jets. We have a rebound jet, a compression jet, or an open jet, which adjusts both. It's not very popular. Most of your shocks are going to be rebound adjustable or compression. So as you screw the driver in, it pushes the metering rod up the shaft and it puts that needle into the jet. So as that needle comes out of the jet, fluid flows by. So the bigger the taper, the more fluid that can flow by, the larger the adjustment range. Okay, so again, screw the adjuster in, metering rod pushes against the needle into the jet, and again, the larger the taper, the more adjustment range we have. So on this shock, we have a pretty fine tapered needle in it, and on this shock, we've got a much larger tapered needle. Okay. So now you're going to ask why do we want these different needles? What's it matter? What's the point of that? Let me get this pulled back up. Well, the point of it's pretty simple. So the first shock with the really tight range, that's been a great option for our wing customers, whether it's a micro wing customer or certainly a sprint car customer, because we've found adjusting that low speed, your 0 to 1 inch, is very critical. And sometimes a 20-pound change makes the car go from really fast to not very drivable, okay? So we've narrowed that window down, and we really focus on adjusting that area. Now, non-wing wise, when the track really slicks off and you need the left rear to get up and get weight transferred over to the right side, we need that larger range. If you put that wing shock on there and you opened it all the way up, it's probably still not going to transfer enough weight. It's still going to have too much low-speed rebound in it. So that's important there. Even on your front shocks, for example, like your right front, you're going to want a pretty wide adjustment range non-wing wise, right? So you're going to want that thing to get really soft when it's all the way open. Well, we're going to do that by running a larger tapered needle to give us more adjustment range there. So again, this isn't anything that's specific to CSI. All of your shock builders and tuners will have a variety of different options there to make sure that they get you the range you need. You don't want too much range. So if you have a bunch of area that you're not using, that's not necessarily ideal because your adjustment jumps are much bigger, and if you're not going to use the back half of that range, you might as well be able to have much finer adjustments, if that makes sense. So that's how the inner workings of an adjustable shock work. Very similar, no matter the brand of shock you have. Adjustable shafts. When you crash a shock, an adjustable shaft is going to be much more expensive to repair because of all of that inner working that go on inside there. So it's not just a solid shaft like you would have back in your non-adjustable days. So you bend that thing and it's a $30 shaft. An adjustable shaft, there's a lot of stuff going on in there. They're gun drilled. There's a lot of interior machine work where that jet seats, where the metering rod goes through, so they are very expensive to replace. Today's day and age, though, I would say 95% of the shocks we build anymore are adjustable. As we race in times where the promoters are trying to get the nights as short as possible for the fans, keep them engaged. A lot of times we don't have a bunch of time between each session on the track to be bolting and unbolting shocks, so the adjustable shock makes it much easier. Also, you're able to really fine tune. As you saw in that one left rear, if you decide, I just need 20 pounds more at 0 for the feature, going to be in dirty air, and I need that just a little bit more, well, if you were to have that many non-adjustable shocks in your trailer, you'd have to have a separate trailer to haul them all. So you can really fine tune with an adjustable shock where you can't. It becomes much more difficult with a non-adjustable. So, a couple questions here. Tim Stratton, what's the best shock for our micro? Gonna run 600 restricted, then A class. Tim, what type of chassis do you have? A little bit of a loaded question. Micros are different than pretty much any other market we're in. Quarter midgets, most of the chassis are pretty similar. Sprint cars very similar. Midgets, there's really only one chassis manufacturer. Micro, there's a drastic difference from a hyper to a D1, and and so let us know what type of chassis you have, and then I'll answer what's been working best with those kind of cars. Colin, got your question answered. Awesome. Alex, I saw you called today. I will get back to you with you tomorrow, Alex. I apologize I wasn't able to. It might have been your father tonight. Mondays are extremely busy here on the phones, and we had one of our sales guys out sick today, so I was answering a lot of phone calls. Will increasing shock pressure help on a rough track? If so, how much pressure is too much? Track's really rough all the time. So yeah, increasing gas pressure will help on a rough track to a certain point. So typically on a micro, 40, 50 pounds is like where we would run on a rough track. If you get much more than 60, you tend to have diminishing returns. You'll get too much spring rate in the shock and it'll get bouncy. Increasing air pressure will help get through the holes as well. So yeah, that's tough when you race on a place that's really, really rough, because especially if it's slick and rough, because everything you're going to do to try to get it through the holes is going to limit traction around the rest of the track. So Chris Connor, best D1 setup on shocks for non-wing. So D1 customers, we have them on there's a couple different packages. Up until shootout, everybody was on our RS17 gas shocks, and some of those guys with the XT right rear. Has been a really versatile shock package, really good on up against a curb and tracks that have character. The car that won, Outlaw Wing, had that exact package on, D1 with our stuff at the shootout. Non-wing, that same package would have been definitely the package of choice. We've since started to develop a more simplistic shock package for the D1 guys, something that's a little more user-friendly, and that would be the 22 LTE. So it's a large body twin tube, makes a ton of grip, but you don't have to fool with the gas pressure, and it's only 12 clicks of adjustment. So again, what I kind of just showed you with the needles there, we're going to be getting the same range you need, but out of less clicks, so it's bigger jumps. So if you're don't have a ton of experience with adjustable shocks and you want a more user-friendly, just simplistic shock package, that 22 LTE is a great option. It's less expensive. That's what Hagopian won an A-class with. So if it was me personally and I was building a car, I would still do the gas shocks with the XT, but I've got 20 years of shock experience, right? So I want to really adjust everything to the finest detail. So a couple different options there. Budget might play into it too. The 22 LTE is a little bit less expensive. Jeff By 305 wing car. Just reading his question. So Jeff got into a situation that we just spoke about briefly, that the track got really slick and slowed down, but it also got rutted up. So did you run the XT and you just were hesitant to adjust it, or you were hesitant to run the XT? If you ran the XT, definitely, if it was a four-way or even a three-way, if you could have adjusted some high-speed compression into it, that definitely could have smoothed things out through the rough. Colin, midget XT right rear, RS15 left rear. When it gets slick, do you want to decrease left rear rebound when increasing right rear compression? So Colin, typically when it gets slick on a midget, we will remove a little bit of rebound. I don't like to take a ton of rebound out because I think you use a little bit of left rear drive, but we do take some out to try to transition weight to the right rear and get some right rear side bite out of the car. We don't have any used steering gears at the moment, Todd. Steering gears have been extremely hard to come by for the past 2 years. KSC has a massive back order. I believe we have maybe 16 steerings on order, and they just trickle in like one every few months. So hard to get a new steering, and so for that reason, used steerings. There hasn't been very many on the market. People haven't been letting them go. Even outlaw teams that typically would sell some of that stuff haven't been because it's really hard to get. So I haven't seen any good rebuilt steering gears used for sale for a little bit there. You just got to be careful buying some that haven't been rebuilt, because if it's been in a crash or hit a infield tire, it's not very difficult to end up sinking $600-700 in one. So if you buy a used one for $1,200-1,300 and then got to sink $700 in it, you might as well have bought a new one if you can find one. So yeah, that's a tough one. So you did run the XT, just hesitant to adjust it. That's understandable. The XT, I think you don't have to make a giant swing, right? You could have just went from the smooth track to the rough track on the compression only and probably got through the holes better. So if you have more questions about that, need to be reassured a little bit, feel free to give me a call. I'm more than happy to walk you through that. Does anybody else have any questions for this evening? This will probably be the last Monday morning quarterback for a few weeks. I want to try to do it more regularly this summer, but have a bit of a spring break / racing trip set up with Hudson. So we'll be gone next week racing with him. So I won't be able to go live, but can certainly always answer any of your tech questions, even if we're not live. Shoot me an email. You can direct message me on Facebook, either to my personal page or the CSI page. I do my best to answer those. If you reach out to me and you don't hear back within a day or two, shoot me another message. You're not going to bother me, but sometimes it's overwhelming how many we get, and it's not unheard of for one to get lost in the shuffle. I do want to reply back to every single person, and I try to reply back to every single person, but sometimes on a Monday you'll come in and there'll be 80 emails and one gets sorted to the wrong folder. I sort all of my emails of tech questions and who has to be answered, and so if you don't hear right back from me, definitely reach back out, because I want to get you answered. So, all right. Doesn't look like we have any other questions. Hope you guys have a fantastic evening. Again, if we missed your question or you have something you thought of after the fact, just reach out. I'm more than happy to help you guys. I hope you have a fantastic week, and good luck racing wherever you're going to do that this weekend.